Where did you get those coordinates?
They were my father's last gift.
Emily Grace Carter thought the numbers tattooed on her arm were nothing more than a memorial. Until Major Cole Harrington recognized them as classified and her world unraveled into danger, secrets, and a legacy her father died to protect. Welcome to Golden Heart Stories. This is the story of a daughter who followed a single set of coordinates and uncovered the truth that changed everything. The spring sun hung low over Fort Bragg's parade ground, casting shadows across polished boots and pressed uniforms. Emily Grace Carter stood among the crowd, camera raised to capture her brother Tyler James Carter's moment. The showcase delivered everything he'd promised: precision drills, ceremonial formations, commands echoing across the field. Pride swelled in her chest as she watched him march, posture perfect, face focused. When the ceremony concluded, Tyler waved her over. Emily smoothed her sundress and walked toward the cluster of uniforms. The sleeveless cotton felt suddenly inadequate among so many decorated soldiers. Come here," Tyler called, voice bright. "I want you to meet Major Cole Harrington. He's been my mentor this whole year." Major Harrington stood tall and composed, shoulders squared beneath his dress uniform. He had the weathered face of hard decisions, lines around his eyes, tension in his jaw. When Emily approached, he extended his hand. "Miss Carter, your brother speaks highly of you," he said, voice measured and professional. Emily shook his hand, returning his smile. "He talks about you all the time, Major." "I'm glad to." She never finished the sentence. Major Harrington's gaze dropped to her arm, where her tattoo was visible below her shoulder. The coordinates were small but precise: 47.4502 N, 111.3008 W. She'd gotten them inked 2 years ago, shortly after her parents died. The numbers meant something private, carried close to her heart. But the Major's reaction was anything but casual. His hand tightened for half a second before releasing. His face didn't change, not exactly, but something shifted behind his eyes. The warmth drained. His pupils dilated and his breathing altered. Emily watched confusion replace courtesy in real time. "Excuse me," he said quietly, voice stripped of pleasantries. He turned his head slightly, not breaking eye contact, and spoke in a low tone to nearby soldiers. "Lieutenant Ramirez, Sergeant Kim, perimeter alert. Now." The two soldiers stiffened and moved immediately, hands drifting to their radios. Emily felt her pulse quicken. Tyler's smile faltered. "Sir?" Tyler said, stepping closer. "Is something wrong?" Major Harrington raised one finger, a command for silence. His attention remained fixed on Emily. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "where did you get those coordinates?" Emily's throat tightened. The question felt like an accusation. It's personal," she stammered, suddenly aware that other soldiers were watching. "It's just a tattoo." "That's not an answer." His tone was harder now, edged with something that made her stomach twist. "Who gave you those numbers?" "No one gave them to me," Emily said, voice rising defensively. "They're from It's private." "Why does it matter?" "It matters." Major Harrington took a half step closer, lowering his voice so only she and Tyler could hear. "Those coordinates are classified. They correspond to a location that shouldn't exist on any civilian record. So I'll ask you again, where did you get them?" Emily's mind raced. She'd chosen the numbers herself, hadn't she? After her parents died, she'd found them scribbled in her father's old notebook. She thought they were just a place he loved, maybe a camping spot or hunting ground. Something sentimental. She never imagined. "My father," she whispered, voice cracking. "They were in his things." "I thought." "Your father." Major Harrington repeated the words slowly, testing their weight. He glanced at Tyler, then back to Emily. His jaw clenched. "What was your father's name?" "Daniel Robert Carter. He was a carpenter. He's been gone for 2 years. Something flickered across the Major's face: recognition, maybe disbelief. He exhaled through his nose, a sharp, controlled breath, and stepped back. "This conversation isn't over," he said quietly. "I need to make some calls." "Don't leave the base." Tyler reached for his arm. "Sir, with all due respect, what's going on?" But Major Harrington was already walking away, hand pulling a secure phone from his jacket. Emily stood frozen, her brother's hand on her shoulder, the weight of staring eyes pressing down. The pride she'd felt an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by cold dread. She looked down at the tattoo on her arm, numbers that had once felt like a tribute, a quiet memorial to a father she'd loved. Now they felt like a brand. A mark that had just changed everything. The parade ground around her seemed to narrow. The cheering families, the bright flags, the perfect formations all blurred into background noise. Emily's hands trembled as she lowered her camera. Somewhere deep in her chest, a certainty formed, sharp and undeniable. Her life had just begun to unravel. They sat in a windowless briefing room, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Major Harrington had led them here without explanation, his silence more unnerving than any interrogation. Emily's fingers drummed against the metal table. Tyler sat beside her, jaw tight, eyes darting between his sister and his commanding officer. Major Harrington finally spoke, his voice stripped of courtesy. "Those coordinates on your arm," he said, leaning forward with his hands clasped, "they correspond to a classified safehouse in Montana. I know because I spent 3 months there 8 years ago, recovering from injuries." The words landed like a physical blow. Emily felt the air leave her lungs, her mind scrambling. A safehouse. Not a camping spot. Not a sentimental location. Her father had written coordinates to a military safehouse. Tyler's confusion was immediate. His brow furrowed, his head shaking slightly. "That's impossible," he said, voice rising. "Our dad was a carpenter. He built furniture and repaired decks. He never served, never had clearance." "Your father had access to information he shouldn't have had," Major Harrington interrupted, his tone hard and certain. "The fact that those coordinates exist on your sister's arm means your family is hiding something. Whether you know it or not." Emily watched Tyler's face cycle through emotions: disbelief, anger, defensiveness. But beneath it all, she saw the same doubt growing inside her own chest. The major's certainty was absolute, and it left no room for comfortable explanations. "We need to investigate this connection," Major Harrington continued, his gaze shifting between them. "If your father had access to classified locations, we need to know how, why, and who else might know. This isn't optional. This is a security matter now." Emily's throat felt dry. She wanted to argue, to defend her father's memory, to insist this was all a mistake. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, a memory surfaced sharp and sudden. The wooden box. Her father's old wooden box. It had been in the back of his workshop closet, behind paint cans and wire coils. She'd found it weeks after the funeral, clearing out the house with Tyler. The box was plain oak with brass hinges, locked with a padlock she'd cut through. Inside were items that made no sense: laminated cards with numbers and codes, USB drives she'd never examined, a folded map marked with red ink, receipts from medical supply companies. She'd kept the box, stored it in her apartment without thinking about it. At the time, it seemed like harmless memorabilia, scattered remnants of a man's private thoughts. Now, under Major Harrington's steady gaze, those items took on a darker weight. "I have a box," Emily heard herself say, voice sounding distant. "My father kept a wooden box with strange things in it. Cards, drives, maps. I didn't understand what any of it meant." Major Harrington's expression sharpened, his posture straightening. "Where is it now?" "My apartment. I stored it in my closet." Tyler turned to her, his face pale. Why didn't you tell me about this?" "I didn't think it mattered," she whispered, though she knew it was a lie. Some part of her had always known those items were important, had sensed they carried secrets she wasn't ready to face. She'd buried the box in her closet the same way she'd buried questions about her parents' sudden death 2 years ago. Major Harrington stood, his movements precise. "We're going to retrieve that box. Tonight. And then we're going to find out exactly who your father was." Emily felt the room tilt, the lights suddenly too bright. Curiosity and fear twisted in her stomach, inseparable and suffocating. She thought of her father's hands, rough from carpentry work, holding a pencil as he wrote coordinates to a military safehouse. She thought of her mother's quiet smile, how she'd deflected questions about their past. What had they been hiding? Tyler reached over and gripped her hand, his palm sweaty. She squeezed back, drawing what comfort she could from his presence. But the comfort was thin, barely enough to cover the growing dread. "I need to know," Emily said quietly, more to herself than to the others. "I need to know the truth." Major Harrington nodded once, a sharp acknowledgement. Then let's go find it. As they stood and moved toward the door, Emily felt the weight of her decisions pressing down. Whatever they discovered would change everything. The ordinary life she'd known, the safe memories, all of it was cracking apart, revealing something dark beneath. There was no turning back. Fear pushed her forward, curiosity pulled her deeper, and somewhere between the two, Emily Grace Carter stepped into a truth she wasn't sure she could face. Emily's apartment felt different now. She stood in her living room with the wooden box open, its contents spread like evidence. Tyler paced behind her while Major Harrington crouched beside the table, scanning each item. The laminated cards made Emily's hands tremble. They were military-grade access badges with embedded security chips. Her father's photo stared back, but the name beneath wasn't Daniel Robert Carter. It was David Collins, with a clearance level she didn't understand. Major Harrington held up a small tactical radio, turning it over. "This is encrypted communication equipment," he said quietly. "Standard issue for intelligence operatives." Tyler stopped pacing, his face pale. "That's impossible. Dad built furniture." "Your father was more than that," Major Harrington interrupted. "Much more." Emily reached for a manila envelope, her fingers shaking as she tore it open. Inside were receipts, dozens of them, all dated from the 2 years before her parents died. Medical supply companies, surgical equipment, pharmaceuticals that sounded military, trauma kits designed for battlefield use. The paper crinkled as she read through them, each receipt adding another layer to a picture she didn't want to see. Her father hadn't just accessed classified locations, he'd been treating people. Operating some kind of medical facility in the shadows. He was running a safe house, she whispered, the realization hitting her like cold water. Wasn't he? Major Harrington's silence was answer enough. Emily couldn't stay in the apartment. She needed confirmation. The next morning, she knocked on Mr. Peterson's door, the elderly neighbor who'd lived next to her parents for 30 years. Mr. Peterson opened the door slowly, his weathered face cautious. The expression faltered when he noticed the intensity in her eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice tentative. "It's been a while. I need to ask you about my father," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "What do you remember about him?" The old man's expression shifted, becoming guarded. He glanced past her as if checking for witnesses, then stepped onto the porch, pulling the door nearly closed. "Your father was a good man," he said carefully. "A very good man. That's not what I'm asking." Emily stepped closer, voice dropping. "You knew him for decades. You must have seen things. Strange hours. Unusual visitors." Mr. Peterson's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands, weathered and spotted with age, wrestling with words he'd kept locked away. "Daniel was special," he finally said, the word coming out like a confession. "The way he carried himself. The way he noticed things. I always knew he wasn't just a carpenter." "What else?" Emily pressed, feeling her heart race. "What aren't you telling me?" "There were people," Mr. Peterson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Late at night. Different cars. They'd come to the workshop, stay for hours. Sometimes I'd see bandages, hear voices discussing things I couldn't understand." He looked up at her, his eyes sad. "Your mother helped too. I never asked questions, Emily. But I knew your father was doing something important. Something dangerous." Emily felt the ground shifting. Every memory of her father was now suspect, recontextualized by this terrible knowledge. The late nights, the locked workshop, the conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She thanked Mr. Peterson mechanically, barely hearing his final words as she walked to her car. Tyler was waiting, leaning against the passenger door with his arms crossed. "Mr. Jameson said the same thing," Tyler said before she could speak. "That Dad was different, that he had a way of helping people." Emily slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. The weight of acceptance pressed down on her chest. Her father had lived a double life. Her mother had been complicit. Everything she'd believed about her family was built on carefully maintained lies. "They protected us," she said softly, more to herself than to Tyler. "By keeping us in the dark." Tyler climbed into the passenger seat, his silence heavy. As Emily started the car, she felt two opposing forces tearing at her. Fear whispered that she should walk away, let the truth stay buried. But curiosity, deeper and insistent, demanded she keep digging, keep searching, keep pulling at threads until the whole tapestry unraveled. She pulled onto the street, hands steady even as her world fractured. The woman she'd been yesterday was gone. In her place was someone who understood that truth was worth pursuing even when it destroyed everything you thought you knew. Emily Grace Carter drove forward into uncertainty, chasing ghosts she wasn't sure she wanted to catch. Major Harrington made the proposal in his office, his tone clinical and devoid of warmth. Emily sat across from him with Tyler beside her, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the desk. The major's hands were folded, his posture military straight. "We need to run a full security screening," he said, the words landing with bureaucratic weight. "Background checks, interviews with associates, verification of your activities over the past 5 years. Standard protocol when classified information is compromised." Emily felt her breath catch. "I didn't compromise anything. I had no idea what those coordinates meant. That's precisely why we need the screening. To determine how deep this goes. I need your full cooperation, Miss Carter. This isn't optional." She found herself nodding despite the rising alarm in her chest. She signed forms she barely read, authorized access to records. Each signature felt like surrender, like handing over pieces of herself to strangers who would pick through her life. The calls started the next morning. Emily was at her desk when her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Sarah, 3 words that sent ice through her veins. Who are these people? Government agents had called, asking questions about Emily. Her habits, her routines, whether she'd discussed her family history. Within an hour, 3 more friends sent similar messages. Her manager pulled her aside after lunch, his expression mixing concern and suspicion. Federal investigators had contacted Human Resources, wanting to verify her employment, review her records. "Is everything okay?" her manager asked, and Emily heard the unspoken question beneath his words, "Are you in trouble?" "It's a family matter," Emily managed to say. "Nothing to worry about." But worry clung to her like smoke. She left work early, hands shaking on the steering wheel as she drove home. The sensation of being watched had become physical, a pressure at the back of her neck. Every car that merged into traffic seemed suspicious. Every person who glanced her direction felt like surveillance. The city had become hostile, a maze where unseen eyes tracked her every movement. That evening, Emily stood at her apartment window, staring at the empty street below. No obvious surveillance, no parked vehicles. But the absence made it worse somehow. They were professionals, patient. The paranoia was justified, earned by the agents who'd called her friends and workplace, by the screening that had turned her life inside out. Her phone rang. "Tyler." She answered, desperate for connection. They called my commanding officer," Tyler said, voice tight with frustration. "They're asking about Dad. About you. About conversations we've had. I don't understand why this is happening. It's just a tattoo." "It's more than that," Emily interrupted, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. "You know it is." "I don't know anything anymore," Tyler snapped, panic beneath his anger. "None of this makes sense. Dad was a carpenter. We were normal. We weren't. We just didn't know it." The silence stretched thin and uncomfortable. When Tyler spoke again, his voice had become distant. "I can't do this right now. I need space." The call ended before Emily could respond. She stood holding the phone, feeling the last thread of support snap. Tyler, who'd been beside her through everything, even he was pulling back, unable to process what they'd uncovered. Emily was alone now, truly alone, suspended in a web of surveillance and suspicion that tightened with each passing hour. She moved to her couch, wrapping her arms against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The question that had been growing in her mind since the parade ground now consumed her entirely. Who was my father? Not the man who'd taught her to measure twice and cut once. Not the man who'd smiled at her school plays and built her a bookshelf. Those memories were real, but incomplete, fragments of a picture she'd never fully seen. Who was Daniel Robert Carter? Who was David Collins? What had he done in the shadows while she slept safely in her childhood bed? Emily stared at nothing, her mind circling the question endlessly, desperately. The surveillance, the screening, the isolation, it was all leading somewhere dark. And she had no choice but to follow, pulled forward by forces she couldn't control, searching for a truth about a man she'd thought she'd known. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls closing in. And Emily Grace Carter sat in the gathering darkness, haunted by ghosts and questions and the terrible certainty that nothing would ever be simple again. The black SUV appeared on Tuesday morning, parked 3 houses down from Emily's apartment. She noticed it while leaving for work, its tinted windows reflecting the pale sunrise like dead eyes. Something about the vehicle triggered an instinctive warning in her gut. By evening, it had moved closer, positioned where it could watch both her entrance and parking garage. Emily stood at her window after dark, hands gripping the curtain as she stared down at the SUV. It had been there for 2 hours without moving. The vehicle's presence felt deliberate, calculated, a message: we are watching, we know where you are. Her phone buzzed. Major Harrington's name appeared on the screen. "Miss Carter, I need you to listen carefully," he said, voice carrying new urgency. "That vehicle outside your building, it's not one of ours." Emily's throat went dry. "Then whose is it?" "Foreign intelligence. We've identified a second surveillance team. They're following the same trail we are, moving fast. Too fast." The room seemed to tilt. Emily pressed her palm against the window glass, feeling its coolness anchor her. "What do they want?" "Information about your father's operation. The safehouse. The people he protected." Major Harrington paused. "But unlike us, they won't be bound by legal constraints. We need to move. Now." Emily's gaze dropped to the SUV. As if sensing her attention, the engine started, a low rumble carrying through the night. The headlights remained off, but exhaust rose in white clouds. "Where?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Montana. The cabin where those coordinates lead. If your father left anything that explains his network, it'll be there. We need to secure it before they do." The cabin. Emily had never been to Montana, had never known her father owned property there. The coordinates tattooed on her arm had been abstract until now, numbers without meaning. But they represented a real place where her father had conducted his secret life. "I can't just leave," Emily said, though the words felt hollow even as they left her mouth. "My job, my apartment. They know where you work. They know your routines. They know everyone you've spoken to." Major Harrington's tone softened slightly. "If you stay here, you become a target. Or worse, leverage. Come to Montana. Help us find the truth. It's the only way to end this safely." Emily closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cold window. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to cling to her normal life. But normal had become an illusion, shattered the moment Major Harrington had frozen at her tattoo. There was no going back to ignorance. "When?" she asked. "I'm outside your building. Northeast corner. Gray sedan. Pack light and come now." Emily found the sedan, partially obscured by shadows. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a duffel bag and filled it with clothes she barely registered selecting. Her mind felt distant, watching herself prepare for a journey she didn't want but couldn't avoid. At the door, she hesitated, looking back at her sanctuary. The familiar furniture, the photos on the walls, all of it now felt like props in a play she hadn't known she was performing. Emily locked the door and descended the stairs with her bag slung over her shoulder. The night air hit her face as she exited the building, sharp and cold. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to look at the black SUV as she crossed the street toward Major Harrington's sedan. The passenger door opened from inside. Emily slid in, pulling the door shut. Major Harrington sat behind the wheel, his face shadowed but his posture alert, coiled with the readiness of someone accustomed to danger. "Seatbelt," he said, and Emily complied, fingers fumbling with the buckle. The sedan pulled away from the curb smoothly, headlights cutting through darkness. In the rearview mirror, Emily watched her apartment building recede, watched the black SUV's headlights flare to life as it began to follow. "They're not even trying to hide," Emily said, voice hollow. "No," Major Harrington agreed, jaw tight as he accelerated through a yellow light. "They want us to know they're there. It's a message." Emily settled back into the seat, her duffel clutched against her chest like armor. Outside, the city slipped past in a blur of lights and shadows. They were moving toward Montana, toward a cabin she'd never seen, toward secrets her father had died protecting. And behind them, somewhere in the darkness, predators followed, patient and relentless. The journey had begun, and Emily Grace Carter knew with cold certainty that nothing would be the same when it ended. The cabin stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by pine trees that blocked the morning light. Emily climbed out of the sedan, legs stiff from the overnight drive. The logs were weathered gray, the windows dark, and the whole place carried the weight of secrets. Major Harrington moved toward the front door with his hand near his weapon, eyes scanning the tree line. Emily followed, boots crunching on pine needles, and saw footprints pressed into the mud beside the porch steps. They were fresh, the edges sharp. Boot treads, large and deep. Someone had stood here within the last day, maybe hours. Emily's pulse quickened as Major Harrington crouched beside the prints, his jaw tightening. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, rising and approaching the door. The cabin door was locked tight with a heavy-duty padlock. Major Harrington pulled a kit from his jacket and worked the lock with efficient movements, the clicking sounds loud in the forest silence. When the lock snapped open, he pushed the door slowly. Emily stepped inside, eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The air smelled of old wood and something metallic that made her stomach clench. Dust motes swirled in thin shafts of light, and as her vision cleared, Emily saw what Major Harrington had already noticed. The furniture had been moved. Not obviously, but enough. A heavy oak table sat inches from the wall where dust patterns showed it had rested. Chairs were angled wrong, leaving drag marks. Cabinets hung open, contents disturbed. "Someone searched this place," Emily whispered. "They were looking for something. And they might still be looking," Major Harrington replied grimly, making Emily's skin prickle. He moved through the cabin with precision, checking corners, testing floorboards, running his hands along walls. Emily watched him work, her heart hammering. The violation felt personal, as if whoever had been here had rifled through her own memories, her father's ghost laid bare and examined by hostile hands. Then Major Harrington stopped in the center, his boot pressed against a particular section of floor. He knelt down, fingers tracing the edge of a board that didn't quite match. Emily moved closer as he pulled a knife and worked it into the gap, prying upward. The board came loose with a groan, and beneath it was a metal handle. The steel was clean, recently maintained, completely at odds with the cabin's neglect. Major Harrington grasped the handle and pulled, revealing a hidden compartment carved deep into the foundation. Inside lay stacks of papers sealed in waterproof bags, several hard drives wrapped in foam, and photographs, dozens of them, showing faces Emily didn't recognize. Her father's secret archive, preserved and waiting. But before Emily could reach for anything, Major Harrington's head snapped toward the window. His entire body went rigid, hand moving to his weapon with practiced speed. Emily froze, following his gaze to the trees beyond, where shadows moved in ways that felt deliberate and threatening. "We're not alone," he said, voice dropping to a harsh whisper that made Emily's blood run cold. He reached for his radio, speaking in terse military code Emily couldn't follow. Then he turned to her, his face grave and determined. "Stay low. Stay quiet," he ordered. "And whatever happens, don't leave this cabin until I tell you it's safe." Emily nodded, her throat too tight for words. Major Harrington moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the curtains, his posture coiled and ready. The silence stretched between them, broken only by distant wind through pine branches and Emily's own ragged breathing. "Your father wasn't just a carpenter," Major Harrington said finally, not looking away from the window. His voice carried a weight Emily had never heard before, heavy with implications she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. He was something far more important. And far more dangerous. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily stared at the hidden compartment, at the papers and drives and photographs that represented a life she'd never known existed. Outside, the shadows continued to move, and somewhere in the forest, people who wanted what her father had protected were closing in. Drawn by the same coordinates tattooed on her arm. Emily Grace Carter knelt beside the opening in the floor, her hands trembling as she reached for the first waterproof bag. Whatever truth lay hidden in these documents, whatever secrets her father had died to protect, she was about to uncover them. And there was no going back from this moment, no way to return to the woman she'd been before the coordinates on her arm had torn her world apart and revealed the stranger her father had truly been. Major Harrington pulled the compartment open wider. Instead of just papers and drives, there was a seam in the foundation wall, barely visible. He ran his fingers along the edge, found a hidden latch, and pressed. A section of wall swung inward with a soft hiss, revealing a concealed room no larger than a closet. Emily's breath caught as the flashlight swept across the interior. Medical gear lined metal shelves, surgical instruments sealed in sterile packaging, IV stands, boxes of gauze and antibiotics organized with military precision. On a small desk sat 2 encrypted radios. This was an operating space, preserved exactly as her father had left it. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Emily stepped into the space, hands trembling as she touched the desk. Her father had stood here, had saved lives here, built an entire shadow existence within these walls. Major Harrington moved to the desk and pulled open a metal filing drawer. Inside were logs, dozens of them, each meticulously handwritten in her father's distinctive script. He flipped through them quickly, then stopped, his body going still. "What is it?" she asked, moving closer. His finger traced a line of text, jaw tightening. When he looked up, his expression carried something new, recognition mixed with disbelief. "Treatment records from 8 years ago," he said quietly. "A Major Cole Harrison Harrington, multiple gunshot wounds, emergency surgery performed off-grid." He paused, meeting Emily's eyes. "That's me. Your father saved my life in this room." The words hung between them. Emily stared at the log, at her father's notations documenting hours of surgery, medication dosages, recovery progress. The stranger before her was connected to her father by blood and survival and secrets buried for nearly a decade. Major Harrington set the log down and continued searching. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, weathered and creased. The date made Emily's blood run cold. 3 years ago, 2 weeks before her parents had died in what everyone called a tragic car accident. The note was in her father's handwriting, hastier than the careful logs, written with urgency. Emily leaned over Major Harrington's shoulder and read words that would shatter her understanding. Tracking risk escalated. They know about the network. If something happens to us, protect Emily and Tyler. The coordinates were a mistake, should never have let her get that tattoo. It marks her as connected. Burn everything if necessary. Trust no one except verified contacts. Emily's knees went weak. She gripped the desk, vision blurring as truth crystallized. The rainy highway. The car that crashed into a ravine. The police report calling it an accident. All lies. All cover for murder. Her parents hadn't died by chance. They'd been killed because of the safehouse, because of the soldiers they'd saved. And whoever killed them had made it look like an accident, closed the case quietly, left Emily and Tyler to grieve without knowing the truth. "It wasn't an accident," Emily whispered. "They were murdered." Major Harrington folded the note and slipped it into his jacket. His expression was grim, hardened by confirmation. He'd suspected from the moment he saw her tattoo that there might be more to her parents' death than the official story. "Your father knew the risk," Major Harrington said quietly. "He knew that running a network like this made him a target. And he knew that by extension, you and Tyler were vulnerable too." The implication hit Emily hard. If her parents had been killed because of what they knew, then the danger hadn't ended with their deaths. The same people might still be watching. Might still consider Emily and Tyler loose ends to be eliminated. Major Harrington turned to face her, his expression grave. He placed his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Emily, listen to me carefully," he said, voice dropping to absolute seriousness. "If your parents were killed because of this network, and if someone is still tracking the coordinates, then you are also in danger. Real danger. The people who did this don't leave witnesses. They don't leave connections alive that might expose their operations." Emily felt the words settle into her bones, cold and undeniable. She'd walked into this cabin searching for answers about her father's past. Instead, she'd uncovered a present-day threat that had been stalking her family for years, patient and relentless. Outside the hidden room, the cabin seemed to press in, its walls no longer a sanctuary but a trap. Somewhere beyond those trees, the people who'd killed her parents were still out there, watching, hunting. And Emily Grace Carter, marked by the coordinates that started everything, was their next target. The sound came first, an engine rumble cutting through forest silence. Emily's head snapped toward the window. Through the curtains, she saw the black SUV rolling to a stop 50 yards from the cabin, its dark bulk unmistakable in the morning light. Major Harrington moved to the window instantly, his body coiled and alert. The SUV's engine idled for a long moment, then cut off. No doors opened. The vehicle simply sat there, waiting, its presence an undeniable message: we know you're here. Then Emily heard footsteps crunching on pine needles, deliberate and unhurried, circling the cabin. Multiple sets, moving in coordinated patterns. Her breath came shallow as she pressed against the wall. The hidden room suddenly felt like a tomb where secrets were buried with those who discovered them. Major Harrington pulled his phone, fingers moving with practiced speed. Outside, the footsteps continued their circuit, pausing occasionally as if examining windows, testing doors. Firebird Actual, this is Harrington, he said quietly. Requesting immediate tactical support at coordinates 47.4502 north, 111.3008 west. Multiple hostiles on site. Authorization Delta 79 Echo. The response came quickly. His jaw tightened as he listened. When he spoke again, urgency sharpened his tone. Affirmative. 4 to 6 personnel. Vehicle matches foreign intelligence surveillance. Connected to the safehouse network. Civilian with me. Daughter of the primary asset. She's a target. The words, she's a target, settled into her chest, making it harder to breathe. All those years of ordinary life had been an illusion. She'd been marked from the moment her father let her get those coordinates tattooed. Branded as someone connected to secrets powerful people would kill to protect or expose. Major Harrington ended the call and turned to Emily, his expression grave. Foreign intelligence, he said quietly. Same network tracking your father's operation. Same people who likely killed your parents. They're not letting us leave with what we found. Emily stared at him, feeling anger rise hot and sharp beneath the fear. All of this, the surveillance, the cabin, the hidden room, the truth about her parents' death had led to this moment. She could retreat, could run. Or she could stand her ground and demand the answers she'd come to find. I'm not leaving, Emily said, her voice steady despite trembling hands. Not without the truth. Not without everything my father left behind. Major Harrington studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, or recognition of her father's determination reflected in his daughter's eyes. He gave a sharp nod, then moved quickly to the hidden compartment. Gathering waterproof bags, hard drives, photographs representing years of her father's secret work. Then we do this smart, he said, handing Emily a bag. We get this evidence out, get you to safety, and bring down whoever killed your parents. Support is 20 minutes out. We hold position or evacuate through the forest. Your choice. Emily looked at the bags in her hands, at the windows. Where shadows moved with deliberate menace, at the door that seemed too flimsy to keep out determined killers. The footsteps had stopped, which somehow felt worse. The silence stretched taut and dangerous. We evacuate, Emily decided, voice firm despite the fear coiling in her gut. They're going to breach any minute. If we stay, we're trapped. Major Harrington nodded, slinging bags over his shoulder and drawing his weapon. He moved to the back window facing the thickest stand of pines and tested the latch. It opened with a soft creak that sounded impossibly loud. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth and the promise of temporary safety. Emily climbed through first, boots hitting soft ground with barely a sound. Major Harrington followed immediately, pulling the window mostly closed to delay discovery. They moved low and fast, weaving between trees with practiced urgency, putting precious distance between themselves and the cabin. Behind them, Emily heard the cabin door splinter open with violent force, heard shouts in a language she didn't recognize. Heard furniture being overturned in violent search. But by then they were 50 yards into the forest, moving deeper into shadow and safety. Carrying with them the truth that her father had died to protect and that Emily Grace Carter had risked everything to claim. The briefing room was sterile and cold, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the conference table. 3 investigators in dark suits sat across from Emily and Major Harrington. Their faces professionally neutral as they laid out folders containing surveillance photos and forensic reports. The lead investigator, a woman with steel gray hair, slid a report across the table toward Emily. Miss Carter, we can now confirm what you've suspected, the investigator said steadily. Your parents were murdered 3 years ago by a foreign intelligence network. The car accident was staged. Brake lines severed, steering tampered with. Emily's hands clenched into fists on the table, nails digging into her palms hard enough to leave marks. She'd known since reading her father's warning note, but hearing it confirmed shattered the last fragile hope. Her parents had been executed because they'd protected people and kept secrets that threatened powerful interests. Major Harrington placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, anchoring her. The investigator continued flipping through documents. The network operates primarily in Eastern Europe. They've been tracking safehouse operations, targeting handlers. Your father was on their list. We've identified 3 operatives who were in the United States at the time, and we're coordinating to bring them to justice. The door opened. Emily looked up as Tyler walked in, his military uniform pressed, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief mixed with anger. He'd spent 3 years believing the official story. Tyler's eyes met Emily's, and the distance that had grown between them collapsed. He sat beside her with rigid posture. Major Harrington nodded with respect. "I've been briefed," Tyler said quietly, voice rough. "They told me everything. The safe house, Dad's network, the murders." He turned to Emily, expression raw. "I'm sorry I pulled away. But I'm here now. We finish this together." Emily gripped Tyler's hand, feeling his fingers close with fierce intensity. They were all that remained, bound by shared loss and the knowledge of what their father had done. The investigator pulled out a leather-bound ledger from the cabin, filled with her father's handwriting. She opened it to a marked page. "Your father's records are extraordinary," the investigator said, her detachment softening. Over 15 years, he provided emergency medical care and secure housing to 32 service members who couldn't access traditional military facilities. 32 people who would have died if not for your father's intervention. Emily stared at the names in her father's careful hand, each followed by dates, injuries, treatment notes. 32 strangers alive because Daniel Robert Carter had decided some things were more important than personal safety. Pride and sorrow warred within her, tangled tightly. She thought of her father teaching her to use tools, patient and gentle. Those same hands had performed emergency surgery on wounded soldiers in a hidden room. He'd been a carpenter to the world, but in secret, something far more important. A guardian. Tyler's grip tightened, and Emily realized tears were streaming down her face. She didn't wipe them away. They were earned. They were owed to the parents who'd given everything. "The evidence you recovered has allowed us to move forward," the investigator continued, gathering documents. 3 arrests in the past 48 hours. 2 operatives in Germany, 1 in Poland. More pending. The network that killed your parents is being dismantled. Additionally, your father's service has been formally recognized. He'll receive posthumous commendation from the Department of Defense. Your mother as well. Major Harrington stood, posture military straight, and looked down at Emily and Tyler with respect and admiration. "Your father fought a war that most people will never know existed," he said quietly. "He fought it without recognition, without support. He fought it because it was right. That's the rarest kind of courage." Emily looked up through tear-blurred vision and nodded, unable to speak. Beside her, Tyler sat rigid, jaw clenched. They would carry this knowledge forward, this terrible and precious understanding. And they would honor his memory by ensuring that his sacrifice would never be dismissed or lost. The war was over. The truth was known. And Emily Grace Carter finally understood the weight and meaning of the coordinates tattooed on her arm. The paperwork sat on the desk, the Department of Defense seal embossed at the top. Emily held the pen, staring at the signature line that would formalize her commitment to the Safehouse support program. 6 months had passed. Major Harrington stood by the window, giving Emily space. Sunlight streamed through the glass. Outside, the world continued its ordinary business, unaware that in this small office, a woman was choosing to step into her father's shadow. Emily pressed pen to paper and signed. Emily Grace Carter. The same name her father had written in logs documenting 32 lives saved. When she looked up, Major Harrington was watching with approval. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "This isn't an easy path. Supporting the network means being available when lives hang in the balance, keeping secrets, accepting risk. But it also means saving people who have no other options." Emily nodded, throat tight. She thought of her father in that hidden room, performing surgery with steady hands. That was the legacy she was claiming. The cabin stood silent in the morning light. Emily walked the perimeter slowly, boots crunching on pine needles. A bronze plaque now adorned the exterior wall beside the front door, its surface polished and gleaming. She stopped and read the inscription. In recognition of those who served in shadow. This site stands as testament to courage, sacrifice, and the quiet heroism of protectors unknown. May their legacy endure. Beneath were 32 small stars etched into the bronze, each representing a life saved. No names, no dates. Just stars, simple and dignified. Emily touched one with her fingertip, feeling the slight indentation. The cabin would remain standing, protected as a historical site under military jurisdiction. The hidden room had been preserved exactly as her father had left it. Future generations might walk these grounds and wonder about the quiet heroism commemorated here. Major Harrington appeared beside her. He studied the plaque for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried profound gratitude. "Your family served this country with honor," he said, gaze fixed on the bronze stars. "Not for recognition, not for medals. That kind of service is rare. It matters more than most people will ever understand." Emily turned to face him, seeing the gratitude of someone whose life had been saved in this very place. Major Harrington was living proof of her father's legacy. "Thank you," Emily said simply. "For everything." Major Harrington nodded once. Tyler stood beside Emily on the cabin's small porch, his military uniform traded for civilian clothes, his expression peaceful. He'd taken leave to be here for this moment. "You're really doing this," Tyler said, respect and concern in his voice. "Joining the program. Someone has to," Emily replied, gaze drifting across the forest. "The network still exists. People still need help. I can't just walk away." Tyler squeezed Emily's shoulder. "Then I support you. Just promise me you'll be careful." Emily covered his hand with hers. "I promise. I'm not trying to replace him. Just honor what he believed in." "I know," Tyler said softly. "And he'd be proud. So am I." They stood together in silence, two siblings bound by shared loss, watching sunlight filter through pine branches. The coordinates that had started everything represented something far more important now, a legacy of protection. Emily lifted her left arm and pushed back her sleeve, exposing the tattoo. The coordinates stood out in black ink against her skin. But now, standing on the porch of the cabin those coordinates led to, Emily saw them differently. They were no longer just numbers. They were a map to purpose. They were a connection to her father's secret war. She traced the numbers with her finger and understood she'd been marked for this path long before she'd known what it meant. The tattoo was no longer a question. It was an answer. A symbol of legacy and duty and the quiet courage required to step into shadows and serve without recognition. Emily Grace Carter looked out at the Montana wilderness, at the cabin that held her father's secrets, at the plaque that honored his sacrifice. She was ready. She was her father's daughter, and she would honor his legacy with every breath and every life she helped save. The coordinates on her arm caught the sunlight, gleaming like a promise. And for the first time since this journey began, Emily felt not fear or confusion, but certainty and peace. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Every message helps keep these memories alive. If you know someone who would understand the courage, the sacrifice, and the love in this journey, please share this video with them. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories of family, resilience, and the quiet heroes among us, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching. This has been Golden Heart Stories.